Step into a world where there's no one left.
Many suburban drug users have suffered arrest and imprisonment, but being from the more affluent segments of society and living in smaller communities, they often are able to get off with reduced sentences or probation, and often their records are mysteriously erased, ensuring them the clean credentials they will need to enjoy the good life, if they make it. It's the disenfranchised, whites and blacks, the poor of our society that are hardest hit by the menace of drugs. It is the alienated, the jobless, the hopeless who turn to drugs to numb their daily pain. When their habit finally claims them, they unfortunately cannot afford the expensive funerals. We tried to achieve a balance between the inner city and the suburbs in making this film. And when we got to the suburbs, we found certain strange things. We found that we could find very few, if any, pictures of suburban youths who had overdosed on narcotics. And it began to look, and may be in fact, a truth that maybe physicians write down instead of narcotics overdose, endocarditis, athletics, heart, peritonitis, or what have you. And pictures strangely disappeared from morgues, etc. And they seem to have fewer. So they won't face the problem, which means they can never deal with it, which is kind of sad. 12 minutes before his 9th birthday, his friends brought him a present, some heroin. It killed him. Cleaning fluid or airplane glue and a plastic bag. An eternal high. Junkies steal to support their habits. This transformer put a 12,000-volt jolt through his sneaker. He was 9 when he died. No, drugs have no respect for the young, and more young people are dying every day. Many kids don't know what they're doing, and many parents don't either.
Many folk after the civil disturbance left the city. The numbers started dwindling.
Within days of the riots, many affluent white families fled. The big three automakers increased outsourcing of much of their production to other parts of the country, costing the city thousands of jobs. During the exodus, something sinister moved in.
Mysteriously, a little red capsule called heroin, penny caps, emerged in every community where there were civil disturbances.
The influx of heroin made life in Motown more dangerous. In 1973, Detroit's homicide rate spiked more than 300% to an all-time high of more than 700. Many of the killings were drug-related.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive. This will be a worldwide offensive dealing with the problems of sources of supply as well as Americans who may be stationed abroad wherever they are in the world.
Says battle worthiness is probably lower than at any time in our history. Our army in Vietnam is in a state approaching collapse, where not mere mutinous, the soldiers are dispirited, drug-ridden. At this time, 1 in 2 GIs use marijuana.
I make it down here maybe twice a day. Sometimes in the morning I'll come down here, sometimes in the afternoon. Then we really get it on in the evening.
As a medic, I had my unlimited supply of morphine. Morphine's a painkiller. I was in pain, emotional pain. That's how I dealt with it. It never affected me in how I did my duty. A lot of us were under what I would call situational stress, and we used drugs over there to survive.
I must say I did smoke a lot of pot in Vietnam. In combat, not in combat. It was the kind of thing that was just so little to do, and if you're going to get killed, you might as well be high while you're getting killed. That's how I felt.
military police attempt to crack down, but by late 1971, drugs are claiming more casualties than the war. Troop use of marijuana, opium, and heroin is epidemic. Chief U.S. Army Provost Marshal Major Thornton Ireland.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% of all our military in Vietnam have either experimented with one of these three categories of drugs or are currently using these drugs now.
Feel like all that rejection?
Like I was back in the Nam.
The Veterans Administration offers the addicted vet no rehabilitation or retraining. Just a 6-week methadone detoxification program in a VA hospital for indefinite outpatient methadone maintenance. And while methadone may kill the need for heroin, it's more addictive than heroin. And the VA treats only 988 men. New York City treats 4,000 more with methadone, with 2,000 on waiting lists. But that leaves 35,000 addicted Vietnam veterans without treatment. The city's welfare department has a responsibility for providing public assistance for 6,000 Vietnam vets, many of whom are addicts. As early as 3 every morning, the vets begin lining up outside the understaffed Veterans Welfare Center on 8th Avenue. The glass doors of the center have been replaced with steel. They were destroyed early this winter by vets battering against them to get in.
Well, I tell you what, I wasn't here at 4 o'clock. I just got here about 8 o'clock.
So how come you're up at the front of the line? Are you going to try and bull your way in here?
I am. I'm going in when the crowd goes in.
Even that's not fair to your brothers online, though, is it?
Look, only the strong survive. It's a dog-eat-dog world out here. You better believe it.
world in this land.
That's right. And that's the whole lie.
You're going to push your head at them, huh?
Watch me. Watch me. Watch me. They made us animals, so why not act like one and be one until we get our check and come on out of there. Then we human beings then. Then we human beings again.
That was the situation more than 2 months ago, and although Robert Carroll, Director of Community Affairs for the department, promised in a statement on December 6, 1972, that within 1 month the vets would be in and out of the cold, now, 2.5 months later, the men are still freezing.
You can see right now, we standing out here in the cold. From dudes be here from like you gotta get here at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's 5 below zero. Like that don't make no sense, man. See, when you're on the front line of welfare, it's just like being in Vietnam. Freezing your ass off. That's all I say.
You still gotta fight.
You gotta fight.
Actually, you never stop
because when I came down here on the 19th of last month to go upstairs to pick up my check, it was on the 3rd floor. That ain't my regular floor. When I went up there, the lady called me a nigger. I had an offer in her mouth to get my check.
I went to a telephone company for jobs, and they tell me you don't have enough education to do the job. Your rank is your score is not high enough, but my score was high enough to do 3 years in Nam, but it's not high enough to connect the line in the telephone building. If I could get me a job where I could be my own man, they make me think that they feeling sorry for me. Give me this, give me what I need. This like a pet, like a dog, you know, like give him, you have to be fed now, give him some food, you know?
Anybody can make people stand out on the line, you understand, and wait, you understand? But yet still, when I got my fingers blowed away in the Nam, you understand, wasn't no waiting, you understand what I mean? How'd I feel about
by men who know a lot about the military. 10 of the top men in this organization are former sergeants in the Army or the Air Force. Federal authorities identify this man as the head of the North Carolina mob, Leslie Ike Atkinson.
In the 1970s, we had a heroin problem in the country, definitely in New York City.
A river of money is flowing because business is so good.
It was a gangster town, you know, nobody wanted to go to New York City.
And what evolved here, he took over.
He was a guy that had great leadership skills and knew how to control a product, make distribution all along the East Coast, and control an organization through violence and intimidation.
A state senator from Baltimore, and Frank had him killed.
And he had been identified as one of the largest, if not the largest, heroin trafficker in the United States.
I supplied all of Baltimore, though. Baltimore alone, millions.
You're under constant surveillance. There have been all kinds of stories about your alleged connections with the underworld drug market. What's your reaction, Mr. Jackson?
Well, as far as the connection, that's 100% false. And as far as the surveillance, I welcome, you understand, anybody who feel like they want to waste their time watching me, you understand, well, then they can just go ahead and watch me.
Again, the question, how could a man at the age of 29, who just 6 years ago was earning something like $6,000 a year, acquire so much in so short a time?
Well, I think you asked me before about I worked in the pool room. I want to straighten that out. I own the pool room. Also, the block proceeded to that, you know. And from that and manipulating, you understand, and I just came, you know, fortunately, you understand, and came up to this.
Mr. Brown and Mr. Jackson have paid better than $450,000 in income tax. I think that's more than some of the corporations, Shell, Atlantic Richfield, and a few of the others. Now, for Mr. Leff, who's in charge of the task force to try this case in the newspaper and get the public sentiment against these two gentlemen, I think that's reprehensible. Mr. Jackson has legitimate income on which he pays income tax. That's more than can be said for a whole lot of folks.
Mr. Jackson, it's alleged that just 6 years ago you were earning a little better than $3 an hour as an auto production worker. Just how did you come to acquire this home in Southfield and your other business interests, your automobiles?
Well, I think the law states, you know, that you have to file your income. You know, if I tell you that, you know, then you know my secret, you know. But as long as I file my income, and I think this is what the law states, you know, and I do that.
Do you deny flatly that you are in any way tied in with the illegal drug traffic?
Yes, I do.
Would you care to reveal just what your business holdings are, how you've acquired this wealth?
No, it is a matter of record. You know, if you want to check on that, you can check.
It's a matter of record. You're saying that you have property?
Yes, I do.
How did you acquire the property? Would you mind telling us that, sir?
Well, if I tell you that, then you know my business.
During the 70s. Some millions of dollars right off the top. At some point, they told him that they wanted me next. And was ultimately framed by those in power. They got a very corrupt resources for drugs on it. I never thought I was going to jail. And he says, but I don't think you understand the gravity of what's happened to you here today. That there was a warrant being ready to be dropped on me to give you 120 years. That was all manufactured, and it was on the face of an informant. A gold card informant.
Set me up, which was another thing that really hurt. They extradited me back to New York, and I'm sitting there watching television, and it's a flash that Leroy Nicky Barnes has turned state's evidence. This person's been arrested, that person, this person, that person, that person, and the wife of his 2 children. And
9 former associates of Harlem drug king Leroy Nicky Barnes charged today with narcotics conspiracy and 6 murders. As Jim Van Sickle learned, the man behind the charges is none other than Barnes himself.
For John Dunn, the harsh drug laws he helped pass were turning out to be a mistake.
My conversion originated really based in civil rights issues.
In 1990, Dunn went to Washington to serve in the Department of Justice.
I was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, which led me to visit a number of federal prisons. I was shocked to find the number of inmates who were there really as a result of criminal laws such as we had enacted in the 70s.
Dunn saw that inner-city drug users and small-time dealers, mostly young African-American men, filled the nation's jails.
It was relatively easy to pick drug sellers off the street where the trade was going on. Those who were engaged in non-violent, drug-related crimes really constituted the vast proportion of those who were being sent to prison. The rate and relative percentages of incarceration among minority communities has had a devastating effect.
and who was perceived to use these drugs, right? So there was, back in the 1870s, when the majority of opiate consumers were middle-aged white women, throughout the country, using them for their aches and pains and for their, the time of the month and menopause, and there was no aspirin, there was no penicillin, lots of diarrhea because of bad sanitation, and nothing stops you up like opiates. I mean, millions, many more, a much higher percentage of the population back then used opiates than now. But nobody thought about criminalizing it because nobody wanted to put, auntie or grandma behind bars, right? But then when the Chinese start coming to the country in large numbers in the 1870s and 80s and, working on the railroads and working in the mines and working in factories and, and then going back home at the end of the night to smoke up a little opium the way they did in the old country, the same way white people were having a couple of whiskeys in the evening. And that's when you got the first opium prohibition laws in Nevada, in California, in the 1870s and 80s, directed at the Chinese minorities. It was all about the fear. What would those Chinamen with their opium do to our precious women, addicting them and seducing them and turning them into sex slaves and all this sort of stuff. The first anti-cocaine laws were in the South in the early part of the 20th century, directed at black men working on the docks, and the fear, what would happen to those black men when they took that white powder up their black noses and forgot their proper place in society, going out. First time anybody ever said that, cops needed a 38 would not bring down a Negro crazed on cocaine, you needed a 45. I mean, the New York Times, the paper of record reporting this stuff as fact back in those days. That's when you got the first cocaine prohibition laws, the first marijuana prohibition laws.
So it's all about a Nixon aide reportedly admitted drug war was meant to target black people. And this is on the Huffington Post. Their log line right here. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
I reminisce for a spell, or shall I say think back 22 years ago to keep it on track.